recording has just started. Let's get on to the fourth session of this automation training. Let me share my screen. So let me just do a recap of what we have done so far. Okay, so I think this is the agenda. I think we have followed the agenda and then had additional session created in between. So now, today's session would be developing and deploying a new Mule app. What are the discrete operations we can create, and then how we can create or import that workflow or import that app into the automation and then create the operations is what we're going to see that in the later today. So whatever we covered till now is the main introduction and then building
Yes, no, we're not able to hear you. I don't know if it's for me or.
let me stop the recording.
Yes, no, we lost you for a moment.
Okay, sorry, let me share my screen again. Okay, able to see me, hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to cover the Mule app, developing and deploying the new Mule app. How do we create discrete operations, and then how we can export that from the Anypoint Studio and import it into the automation system. We're going to see that later. So we covered the intro and then building little complex conditions and then header handling, how we can build those, and then creating apps, mainly the REST app, and also how easy to extend the existing Mule app, basically the Active Directory app, Mule app, which we created, and then we are able to how easy to extend them to create multiple different operations based on the need. So it's all PowerShell scripts. We should be able to get those configured and enhance them based on the need. So again, I'm not going to cover all these things. We touched upon the conditional gateway and then the error boundary in the previous session. And then we created the integrations using the REST app and Mule app. So we're not going to touch these things. And then, so we'll straight away go into the Mule app. Over to you, Kishore.
Thanks, Prasanna. Let me start sharing my screen.
Kishore, before you start, let me just remind everyone that MuleSoft is really the underpinnings, right, for automation. These are the low-level connectors, as you guys know. These are not things that we would normally anticipate people on this call develop themselves, our customers, or our partners. But the opportunity to develop these does exist. There's the IDE that Kishore is going to show you. So we have the flexibility, the capability of creating connectors. Generally, this would be done in India. So if you have a project that needs a connector, the thing to do is to contact India as soon as possible. And our factory, quote unquote, in India will try to produce this for you for your project. But again, this is something you can do yourself. Even customers do it. There's thousands and thousands of IT shops that use MuleSoft itself. So it's certainly doable, but it's obviously intended for a technical user, and we're going to try to make this seamless to our customers and even the field organization by doing the stuff in India. So again, just remember that through this conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. I was able to say that. So, so while we are talking about developing a Mule app, so I think in the last session we looked into what are all the what are the out-of-box apps and operations which uses the actual connectors from Mule, which are either developed by Mule or even third-party vendors. But I think you can bring in the connector by by uh, by implementing a Mule app. So these are all the out-of-the-box connector we saw, and you can extend few of the operations, few of the apps by adding new operation as Prasanna mentioned. For example, Serviceaide, because internally we have created those operations using PowerShell connector. So where you can send any PowerShell command using the AD module of PowerShell and create more option operations that are not part of the out of the box content, especially for Windows Active Directory, and that could be applicable for any other app, out of the box app where the exposed operations are not good enough, and those existing operations are exposed through PowerShell connector, so you can extend them to create more operations. But but of course, I think we are planning to add more apps to it, which has underlying generic connectors, meaning PowerShell and probably Groovy connectors or SSH connectors as we move on. But I think these are the ones that we have right now. So what is a so as we know, the motivation behind the session is mainly for the people, technical people, to get a taste of how an app can be built. So we'll of course talk about an example. Ritish is going to walk us through how we have developed, for example, Twilio app, which has one operations for now, which is to send SMS to a phone number. So we're going to walk through how we have developed uh, the Mule app and brought into how that can be brought into the automation application and use that to design the workflow. So, so Mule has, I think, as we discussed in the last session, so briefly, so the main uh, uh, reason behind why we have chosen Mule is with the vast repository of connectors that Mule community provides. So which of course has different application connectors that enables us to connect to third-party applications like any ITSM systems or Salesforce, Amazon, SAP, etc. So which of course I think meaning where the data can be exchanged between these applications to send and receive the data. And then we have technology connectors that again Mule community provides, like SFTP, SSH, and so on, where those are protocol specific connectors where they mostly receive the data, not send the data out. For example, FTP, where you can put the file or store manage the file system, and SSH to connect to remote system and then do shell script operations. So which of course we don't expose those connectors yet, but I think that's what we are going to have ultimately. And I think this is the custom connector. So using you can build new connectors. So like what MuleSoft does, and even the community does, or even the third-party vendors does, you can even create your own connector using the MuleSoft Anypoint SDK, and using those connectors, you can bring those connectors into automation and develop the workflow using through to connect to those endpoint systems. But now, so how do we leverage the Mule Anypoint connector? So be it a connector that is already available, or be it a connector that you are developing on your own. So Mule connector operations run only in Mule run environment. So you can't really uh, access the mule connector operations directly. I mean, there's no unless you deploy them in a mule run environment or mule run server. So so how do we, the question comes is, how do we expose or how do we invoke those connector operations, right? So the goal is to expose these connector operations into the BPMN process or workflow designer so that we can integrate or talk to the third party system. So the approach is to develop. So for the people, I mean, some of you might be aware of that. So Mule has a concept of workflows where, I mean, even in our version 1.0, so all our workflows that we have implemented for customers are in Mule. So what it means is Mule was acting as an orchestration engine where all the whole entire full-blown workflow was deployed in Mule. So, but I think since 2.0, so the idea is to have to bring the designer, the BPMN designer, where customers can start developing or orchestrate the process, the business process from our designer interface. But now, so how are we going to use them or leverage Mule connector over here to expose it to the designer? So the approach is to develop a mule flow, but as so which will not have the full blown workflow as such, but it will just have a discrete connector operation, right? With by exposing it as a HTTP endpoint. So we're going to talk through, of course, I think how it looks like. So how it look like. So if you see on the right side, so how the mapping would be. So the Mule connector will be exposed an app, a Mule app, and each connector operation that that the Mule connector has, so will be exposed as a discrete operation or a Mule flow within that app project using an HTTP endpoint. So what it means is we are going to wrap the discrete connector operation in the Mule app flow, which is going to act as a proxy or a wrap around the API, the third-party connector API that allows the server-side automation to talk to the underlying service through the Mule by invoking the Mule app operation that we are going to ultimately deploy into Mule run through our interface, of course, which we're going to see in action in a while. So, so hopefully, I think we got the gist of what what the approach is. So we're going to have a new lab created with the so that exposes the connector operations as different or discrete operations within that flow, and each operation has a unique HTTP endpoint. So when we take this Mule app and deploy into our Mule run environment through our interface, now the connector operations are exposed through HTTP endpoint so that we can use these connector operations, which of course we call it as app operations when we bring into the application, because I think this so we are not directly invoking the connectors, we are invoking the Mule app operation from the semantic standpoint of view. So how do we create a Mule app, or how do we develop a new Mule app with these discrete operations? So I know this will be I'm just drawing through theory, so we're going to see that in action. But let me walk through quickly. So what the steps involved are mainly I want to touch base on the constructs, the main constructs that the developer has to keep in mind to to develop these discrete operations for a new Mule app. So in any point studios, as some of you might be aware of that, where that the Mule apps can be created in any point studio, which is the IDE supported by Mule. So create a project, any point project, so to start creating Mule flow. So each Mule flow, as you see, step number 3, for example, starts with HTTP endpoint. So use a HTTP connector to put a HTTP endpoint. So we define a URI, a unique URI for there's a discrete operation. Okay, so which is ultimately what we are going to see to to create the operation on our side, on the automation side. So then you can optionally convert the JSON payload that you're going to get to this operation. I mean, if in case you want to convert it to a map and then use the map values in the subsequent flow. But anyway, that is optional. You can directly even use the JSON payload to extract the information and pass it to the underlying connector operation. So the second part, I mean, the next important thing is to actually configure the connector, so the target connector. So this is what the real connector operation is getting invoked. So we use the payload information that we receive from the input, or even if we have transformed any information from the payload, and you can use the information from the previous steps to send it to the actual target connector operation. So for example, in our session, I think we're going to talk about the Twilio send SMS operation. So then once you receive the response, or once you are done with the invoking the connector operation, then you're going to prepare the operation response. So which is very specific to ESA, which is, I mean, our service-side automation. So we expect a specific format of the operation response to be sent out from these discrete operations. So we're going to talk about what the structure would look like. So, and of course, we have provided a transformation operations for people to prepare this for within the UI. So any point studio UI. So so this is for a success case, right? So now there could be cases where the connector operations would throw exception or errors. So we need to handle the exceptions and throw the appropriate operations ESA operation response. So ultimately the response that we expect from this any discrete operation, mule operation, is ESA operation response. So which is a standard structure for both success and error scenarios, where you can send the details about the status code or the response in the so the error or success response as part of the ESA operation response object. So the other from the best practices perspective, so these are the main constructs involving while creating the mule app. So one is the exposing an HTTP endpoint and defining URI, unique URI. Then second thing is to actually make the call to the target connector operation, then preparing the operation response, ESA operation response, for both success and error scenarios, and of course handling the exceptions and returning the ESA, setting the appropriate operation response. So then apart from that, so it is very important to log the have logger statements within this operation flow, so that you can troubleshoot the errors. So we're going to repeat this step number 8 to 2 to 8. So to create any other operations, so like like the one we just saw, so you can follow the same steps to create to create multiple flows within this app to expose the other operations of the connector. So then we're going to validate and test the mule flow within the Anypoint Studio. So Anypoint Studio comes up with a inbuilt mule run. Okay. So you can validate and test, in fact, deploy and test the mule flow within the Anypoint Studio. So once you are good, so then you package the mule app. So you can do export and then create a package out of it. So at the end of this step, so what you have is a mule package. So just a brief introduction of ESA operation response. So of course, we're going to have some improvements to this, especially to have response properties that are not exposed today. But let me brief you what the expectation of the operation response would look like. So you have a status, so which tells indication about whether it is success or failure. So then status code. so which returns the actual status code. So I mean, in case of HTTP, it can be, let's say, 200 or 503 or uh, uh, so whatever. So it can be, let's say, in case of SDK, so AWS EC2, for example, provisioning. So it might give the quota exhausted or any error code or status code of the operation. So which can be a success or a failure status codes. So then a descriptive name of the status code, so which is probably has to be populated in status name. So and then a status line, so which of course mainly from the HTTP standpoint of view will have so status line like 200 OK, for example. So then the reason phrase of why reason phrase of the status code. So then the response body that contains the information, I mean the actual response returned from the underlying connector operation. So which can be a success response or it can be error response. Then response properties, which you can use to populate meta information. So meta parameters, like for example, in case of HTTP, it can be HTTP headers, response headers that you received from the underlying connector operation, or it can be any other properties that you want to send out and use it in the workflow for taking decisions in the process definition. So you can see the example of the operation response for both success and error cases, where you have status code, status name, status line, reason phrase, body, and response properties. Okay. So now, assuming, let's say you have created a mule app by exposing these defining these discrete operations, and you tested and ready with the package that you have got from the Anypoint Studio. So now, how do you import the Mule app into Serviceaide automation so that you can see again, as if you remember, the goal was to uh, have the underlying connector operations to be visible on the designer, process designer or workflow designer, so that you can drag drop them and configure them to execute in the workflow, uh, uh, configure in the workflow. So now, so if you remember the REST, for REST you were directly defining the app instance and operations within the automation portal itself. So now that for MuleSoft it is a bit different, meaning the actual operation definition was the execution part of the operation is defined in or wrapped in the Mule app package that you have created. So now, so you go to automation. So in the integrations workspace, you're going to create a connected app of type MuleSoft. Okay, and import the app package that is generated from Anypoint Studio. So this is where you are really creating telling automation that, so I'm bringing in a new app, right, of, let's say, for example, Twilio or Active Directory with the package that you have in hand. So you can optionally provide an app icon and also choose an execution agent to deploy the app into. So we're going to briefly talk about what this execution agent is in this session as well as in the next session. So I will come to the execution agent in a moment. So you have the Mule app uh, created with the package that you have imported from or exported from Anypoint Studio. So once you have the app created, so it automatically imports all the discrete operation endpoints. So of course, I think what we know, so the package or a zip file that you get from Anypoint Studio, which has the XML of the whole the discrete operation flow that you had created. So what we could extract from the Mule operation or the package is the discrete operation endpoint. So what we do now is we create an operation definition on automation side. So by telling what are the input parameters needed for that operation, what is the payload that we need to send it to execute the operation, and what are the output parameters produced and or to extract the information from the response returned from the operation. So what we do is we choose the actual endpoint that we had defined in the in any point studio while we are defining the app operation flow. So for example, in this screenshot, let's say /get user. So for Active Directory, so you have defined an operation called get user with the endpoint, HTTP endpoint, if you remember. So where you have given the URI as /get user. So apart from that, we create the input. So we're going to see what are the so defining the input parameters, request payload, and extracting the output parameters is same as what we have seen for REST operation. So the only difference is that in case of REST, we define the URI, but in case of Mule operation, we already have the endpoints exposed. So we just select the endpoint instead of defining a new one. Okay, so now that we have app created, the Mule app created at the package deployed, and we have operations defined. So how do we make this Mule app executable? So by the way, so uh, with this step, you can really define it. So once you reach this step, you will be able to see this app and operation inside the designer, and you can even start designing the workflow using these operations. So but I think to complete the whole flow, so as you see here, so once you configure, so we are done, let's say until step 2, right? So the first step is to build the Mule app with discrete operation in Endpoint Studio, then import the app and configure the operation using discrete operation endpoints. So then how do we make these apps operations executable, right? So meaning if we had used these operations inside the workflow and you try to execute a workflow, so so they will not be executing without making these couple of changes that we are about to discuss. So how do we make it executable? So importing Mule app doesn't make it executable unless you deploy that into an agent. So what is an agent? So execution agent is what we say. I mean, agent meaning the Mule run server. So the SaaS or cloud instance of automation has an inbuilt Mule run agent, so which you can use to deploy the apps and execute the operations, especially the where the endpoint systems has a public connectivity. So for example, so I think Twilio, right? So where probably you can use Twilio if imagine if it was so you can send an sorry. So Twilio is not a good example, so which has a SDK. So but you are trying to connect to a system, for example, Salesforce, so where it is deployed on third party, I mean, sorry, in the cloud, so which has a public connectivity. So, and if you want to use or execute an operation through an SDK, sorry, not HTTP. So, for example, Salesforce has HTTP, in which case you would not really use a Mule app. So I mean, as we discussed in last session, so I would request people to use a REST operation or REST apps. So you don't need to go through all of this process. But I think for the cases where you have an SDK available, not which can be accessed only, I mean, not through a HTTP endpoints or REST-based integration. So in which case you will develop a Mule app, right? But to connect to that system which is available in public, so you don't really need to have a on-premise agent. So you can use the cloud instance of automation agent, right? So which comes in built with the automation installation and deploy the apps and execute the operations. So so as you can see, so in so we'll briefly see how in next session, in fact. So how do we I mean, what the architecture looks like for to connect to on-prem agent. So, but you'll see a cloud type agent, so an agent of type cloud in our agent workspace. So you can use a cloud agent to deploy. So if you go to if you use an app, I mean, in the previous step, for example, if you see, so there's a field called execution agents to deploy. So this is where you can see cloud as one of the options. So we have a cloud agent by default that comes along with automation installation. So, but if the endpoint systems are deployed, or they can only be accessible only through on-premise network, right? So which means that the on-prem or the SaaS instance of Mule Run agent can't access the endpoint system. So what it means is, so you have to create a on-premise agent and deploy these apps into the on-prem agent. So you have to register the agent. Which of course we'll talk about that tomorrow. Sorry, in the next session. So you can create a on-prem agent and install the on-prem agent in the on-premise network. So I mean, which involves the multiple step. First is to register the automation agent in the portal, and then you can use that key that is generated to deploy or install the agent in the on-premise network. So once you have that up and running, so you can start deploying these new apps into the on-prem agent, which makes the apps executable. So a side note, so even the out-of-the-box Mule apps that we saw, so are even those must be explicitly deployed into an execution agent to make them executable. So so every tenant that we provision or every customer that we provision, so we get the out-of-the-box content comes along with each customer tenant, those more Mule apps are not really deployed into for example, cloud agent, or the SaaS agent we have. So of course, you'll not have on-prem agents to start with when you provision a new tenant, so which has to be done by the customer. Uh, but I think we don't even deploy those into the SaaS instance, so they have to be explicitly deployed. That's when you can really execute them. So we have talked about deploying the Mule apps into the execution agent. But to connect to the external systems, you need connection information, which helps in connecting those external systems when that Mule app operation is executed. So the connection information has to be configured through an object called service configuration. So I think some of you might have already seen in last session, for example, so where Prasanna was showing. So you can configure the connection information for a Active Directory. So for example, in PowerShell, or even you can see. So for all the out-of-the-box service configurations, for all the out-of-the-box content, so whatever the connection information or the system related connection information is available as service configurations. But if you're creating a new app which you are trying to connect to a new system, um, so which means that you need a new service configuration with those to capture the connection details. So we don't have that option available from UI today. So you can contact the Serviceaide team, or let's say, for example, India team, to get that developed or make it available from backend. But of course, we are going to have that option from UI eventually. So any questions? Okay, so that's all is needed to develop a Mule app and bring it to import the Mule app into an automation tool. and deploy that Mule app into an execution agent, plus configuring the connection information in service configuration is what it takes to complete the flow. So any questions or specific comments before we look into how we can do that in action? Okay. Yep, no question. Let me hand it over to Ritesh to talk about an example flow.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Krishan. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. So I hope everyone is able to see my screen. Okay. So as Kishore mentioned earlier, like there are, if you see, like there is an IDE that is used for creating any project on the Mule side. So that is like AnyPoint Studio IDE. This is available over the internet. You can download and you can play with it. So if you see, like there are like a bunch of on the left side, you see a bunch of connectors available. These are like based on our need, we installed into the system. You can download it from the AnyPoint Studio website also. You can install from it um, their repository. So it will be available in their network and you can download. So uh, like this, like there are a bunch of connectors available in the AnyPoint Studio Mule repository, so you can download. For now, we have used few of the connectors. Let me show you one example that we created for Twilio, and for with the Twilio also we used our own connector because the Twilio doesn't have directly any Mule connector available in their repository. They only expose the SDK. So what we done on top of the SDK is like we created our own um, Mule connector, so that it is like internally available in our Artifactory. So if you want anyone to use this Twilio Artifactory, they can use, they can get it from our Artifactory system. So what we did, like we created a connector which has one operation exposed, that is like sending SMS message that requires few parameters. I will show you what are those parameters. So this is like one connector we deploy. Similarly, we created PowerShell connector, Luma connector, Luma 2 connector, and also ISM connector to interact with our ISM application. So there are a bunch of connectors that we created for our use cases. Similarly, if any use case is there, then based depending on like usage, we can create our own connectors. So how to create any project in the AnyPoint Studio, that I will demonstrate now. So in the AnyPoint Studio, you can create a project. For now, I'll just give just a name demo. So you have to, as I mentioned, like any Mule connector is not readily available without any deploying on Mule Run. It has to be deployed on Mule Run. So in AnyPoint Studio, I have configured one Mule server. So it will go and deploy there. So once you create it, so you will get a like a one plain designer palette where as Kishore mentioned, the first thing that we are going to do on the AnyPoint Studio project is like creating an HTTP endpoint. So you will get a HTTP here. Once you drag, the flow is like you can start putting it putting a flow. So before adding HTTP here, what we need to is like we need to associate this to a domain. So let me. Okay, something wrong with here. Just Okay, something is wrong. I'll show you one what I have pre-configured. So here we need to configure it to uh, domain, our global domain. What global domain is, what we do is like for any tenant that we create on our side, like on the automation project. Similarly, one domain will map it on the mule run, where it will have the all the service configuration, the keys will be reside on the mule run. So either you can encrypt or you can put the plain property values there in the service configuration, which will go and reside into the global domain, and it will be applicable for all the apps present in as part of that any point studio project. So once you like, I'll quickly show what I've done. So this is like as Kishore mentioned, there is like a standard construct that we are expecting as part of any mule operation. So you will have a HTTP request, and you will have a proper HTTP response outside, which is like a ESA operation response, where you can see you will see the success status, and there are other status as well. So, and you can send the payload whatever required, and in case of any kind of a exceptions, you can configure exception response also, where like you can get the specific, like in case of Twilio, you can use the specific exception that you want to expose. This is also needed if you want to do like a branching in your designer based on the error codes. Like if the Twilio is not able to send a message, then if you want to branch based on the error code, you can do it. Otherwise, like a plain operation response is also fine, like generic exception. So here, this is like the standard template that we have for any operation. On top of this, you can start playing, creating your like dragging your own connector. Now what I will do, I'll use this Twilio. So, so where I have the configuration available, where Twilio expects the SID and the auth token from the like these are like we need to get it from the Twilio account, and also from user name, which is available as part of this here. So here, so for this operation, what is required is like the from. This is also standard from that we are going to get it from the Twilio account. And what it is say expecting is like to whom you want to send the message. The from the to address, like typically this is like a mobile number, and the body of the message, the plain text that you want to send out of this message. So what is like the request, in the request you need to like this is reading from the request payload, right? So what it means, like whoever is using this operation, they have to send the two parameters. One is like to, and the one more is like SMS body. So these two parameters are expected out as inputs to this operation, and what the output is like after sending the message from the Twilio account, it will send the response back. So this is how you will typically create any discrete operation on the mule side. Similarly, you can like using this standard template, you can use any mule operations. I'll show you one more example where we created using Windows Active Directory, where so here also like using the PowerShell executor, we created like this will accept any command that you can pass it as part of the payload. So whatever the command you will pass, it will go and execute on the specified service configuration, like the PowerShell configuration that you mentioned in the service configuration. So so what is the next step is like after creating this one, you need to package this as a mule zip. For the interest of time, I created upfront already. So what is like, so you will update the service configurations here. So these are like a SID account what I mentioned earlier. So these what I have done is like I just encrypted these values so it will not be misused, and from account name, and the auth token value which we got from the Twilio account. While creating a Twilio account, we'll get all these values that we need to populate here. So after this, to expose the mule zip that we created on the Anypoint Studio as a integration. So what we need to like in the integration, you have to create it as like a, I'll just put it as a Twilio. So you need to select the MuleSoft option. So now what is like the package that came out of Anypoint Studio that you need to select here. So I will select like one. I created this upfront. So as Kishore mentioned, until you deploy, this is not available for use. So what in like you need to select the agents where you want to deploy. So I'll select cloud for now, and I'll put it as a default execution. So subsequent step, like whenever you drag this operation on any workflow, you don't need to select the agent always. It will pick the default agent which is set on the app level. If you want to override, you can override at the specific operation level. So I'll just deploy it. So once this operation is like deployed, so what is like there's a one HTTP endpoint is exposed on the mule run. So now the next step is now is like what you need to like you need to expose one operation to use it as in the designer workflow. This is similar like any REST endpoint you details you have. Now you want to expose it as a operations. So I'll just start configuring one. Just copy paste the values, pre-filled values. So what I like creating a one send message operation. So if you see like this is auto populated. What is this means like this is the HTTP endpoint URI that is created on the Anypoint Studio. I'll show you the Twilio. So if you see here the HTTP endpoint is send a message. So this is going to be auto populated. Like if it is only one workflow, it will auto populate the value. If it has more than one value, you can select the out of the this drop down. So you can set some timeouts, and after that I mentioned like a so this operation requires two parameters like the message and the to number. So what that I'll configure it as the input parameters for this operation. On top of it, if you want to add any validations, you can add. I'm just creating a plain parameter now. So the thing is like you can select the what is the content type, what is the format of the mule operation. You have the bunch of fields like application JSON format, and any if nothing is found, you can type your own format also. The standard HTTP formats. I'll select the JSON, and I'm expecting the JSON output as well. So the standard we created is like ESA operation response converter, and after that we are returning it as a JSON. So the accept value is also JSON. Now after the executing this operation, I'll get a output parameter which is like a status. That is the status of the message that we are got it from the mule. Sorry, Twilio operation. This is status. So now this operation is ready. So once this is done, now the next step is like using it in the workflow. Just create a one. So if you see like Twilio demo app is available now. So here the execution agent is available. We deployed in cloud, so the cloud agent is available. now because I have kept it as a default agent, I will not select anything here. So I can select the operation which is created. Like if you have created more operations based on the use cases, you can select the operations. The next thing is like inputs. Now you need to add the values for the input. So this will take it from the workflow input parameters. So message. And one more parameter I need is toNumber. Just put it as number. So I'll go and in the input parameters, I'll just okay. We need to fix this issue. This is spinning. And also the message. Sorry for that. Just a minute, and just I'll do it in a big screen. Okay, so I've just configured now. So the workflow is ready now, and just quickly. And I'm sending it to my mobile number. So typically the Twilio is expecting the format is like the country code needs to be sent mandatory. So we need to put it as in the operation parameters. If they don't like any use case, like if the customer doesn't want to populate this number for all the people, what you can do is like in the input parameter you can add the transformation. You can suffix it with the country code, whatever the country code you want, as in the transformations. Just now here I'm just putting it. So I can see I got the message into on my mobile, and also I can see the status exposed, like which is queued. So typically like Twilio, this is the status that they will send on the uh, operation invocation. So they will mention it as a queued. Okay. So any questions so far? So this is like once you upload a package onto the app, then next part is most of the thing is similar to the how REST operation is configured. So you need to expose it as one of the operation that which we can use it onto the designer workflow. Okay.
Any questions on the Mule app? So anything, Kishore, you want to cover from the deck? Anything need to update?
I guess we are good. So one thing I probably missed or did not mention in the while creating Anypoint Studio project in Anypoint Studio, so we had to associate it to a global domain. So which is again another project. Ritesh, correct me if I'm wrong. So
Yeah,
global
that is like
domain is.
out of, yeah. Yes, Kishore.
Okay. So I think what it means is when you start creating a new app, there are few projects that you might have to take, especially the global domain, right? Any other connectors, for example, that we have developed in case you want to use an existing connector or for a connector that we develop. So you need to take those connectors also into Anypoint Studio and install them so that you can see them in the palette. Or even, for example, global domain. So you can associate the app to a global domain where all of our service configurations or apps lie onto.
That's right. I think it's not simple. Any Point Studio download, we did added explicitly for logging and other purpose. We created our own version of that. That's what the domain would help, right, Kishore?
Right.
Okay. Right, then I'll stop the recording. Will still be on. Any questions we can still take on? Stop.